Sophia had exactly 3 seconds to decide. 3 seconds before the elevator doors hissed shut, sealing her in with a murder in progress. She could turn and run, screaming for help that would never arrive in this silent hospital wing, or she could do her job and pretend she was invisible. But as the ruthless Choi Min-seo raised his boot for the final strike against a bleeding man, Sophia didn't run. She chose a third option, one that defied every instinct of survival. She marched into the center of the room, her KR delivery boxes clutched like armor against her chest. Min-seo's eyes snapped to hers. They were sharp, predatory, and filled with a cold fury that made her knees feel like water. Before he could utter a threat, Sophia reached into her uniform collar and pulled out a heavy, ancient gold signet ring.
She didn't speak.
She simply held it up between them. Hey besties. Welcome to Clemency Love Stories. If you're ready to see a corporate bully get what's coming to him, hit that subscribe button. Let us know where you're watching from. Is it morning or night for you? Now, let's get back to the takedown. Min-seo's lethal kick stopped inches from her ribs. Time didn't just slow down, it died. The Dragon of Soul stared at the ring, then at the girl in the cheap delivery cap, and for the first time in 20 years, his hand trembled. That ring, he rasped, his voice a jagged blade. Where did a stray like you get that? Instead of begging for her life, Sophia felt a strange, cold calm wash over her. It belonged to the true king, she whispered. And his enforcer is standing right behind you. Min-seo's face went bone white. He didn't even have to turn around to feel the temperature in the room drop to sub-zero. From the darkened doorway, a shadow detached itself from the wall. A tall, imposing figure with eyes that held the weight of 1,000 graves. Touch her, the shadowy bodyguard murmured, his voice smooth as silk and just as dangerous, and I will ensure you don't live long enough to regret it. Sophia's heart hammered against her ribs. She had just traded a quick death for a life of absolute chaos. Across the room, the terrified witness peeking through the doorway let out a muffled sob of horror. The air thickened with a tension so heavy it felt like it might snap. Then, the storm outside broke. A massive thunderclap shook the hospital windows, and the lights flickered and died. In the sudden darkness, the sound of a dozen suppressed weapons clicking off safety echoed through the hall. Stay behind me, the bodyguard commanded. Before Sophia could blink, Min-seo's foot finally moved, not to kick her, but to shove her toward the pillar as a hail of gunfire shattered the medical monitors behind them. Glass exploded like diamonds in the dark. Sophia felt a hand wrap around her waist, spinning her behind the thick marble column. She was pinned between the cold stone and a body that felt like solid iron. Every inch of her was pressed against the shadowy bodyguard, the scent of rain and gunpowder filling her lungs. Don't move, he breathed into her ear. Not until the floor is covered in their blood. The hospital hallway was quiet, except for the soft squeak of my sneakers on the shiny floor. Outside, the rain was pouring down, hitting the windows like thousands of tiny pebbles. I clutched the stack of delivery boxes tighter to my chest. My KR delivery uniform felt damp and heavy. All I wanted to do was drop off this package and get back to my scooter. I hated hospitals. They were too white, too cold, and they always smelled like cleaning chemicals and fear. I looked at the room number on the screen of my phone. Room 402. This was a private wing, the kind where the doors are extra thick and the air feels still. I pushed the heavy door open, expecting to see a patient sleeping or a nurse checking in for a bag. Instead, I stepped into a nightmare. The room was dimly lit, and the rhythmic beeping of the heart monitors sounded like a warning. In the center of the room stood a man who looked like he had stepped out of an old history book, but in the scariest way possible. He was older, with sharp eyes and black hair slicked back, so tight it looked painted on. He wore a black outfit with gold dragons embroidered on the shoulders. Even though he wasn't moving yet, he looked like a storm ready to break. On the floor in front of him, a man in a rumpled suit was begging for his life. His face was covered in bruises, and he was shaking so hard his teeth were chattering. "Please, Boss Choi," the man on the floor sobbed. "I didn't mean to lose the shipment. Give me one more chance." Choi Min-seo didn't say a word. He didn't have to. His silence was louder than a shout. He looked down at the traitor with pure, cold fury. I stood frozen in the doorway, my breath catching in my throat. I should have turned around. I should have run. But my legs felt like they were made of lead. Suddenly, Menecios had snapped toward the door. He saw me. He saw the delivery girl who had seen too much. In his world, there were no accidents, only witnesses that needed to be silenced. "Who are you?" he hissed. His voice was a jagged blade that made my skin crawl. I just have a delivery," I stammered, my voice high and thin. "I'm in the wrong room. I'll just go." I turned to flee, but he was too fast. He moved with the grace of a predator. Before I could even take a step, he lunged forward. I saw his black boot move in a blur. He performed a powerful sidekick, his foot crashing directly into my chest with the force of a car wreck. The impact was deafening. The air was knocked out of my lungs in an instant. I felt my ribs groan under the pressure, and the world seemed to tilt. My hands flew open, and the delivery boxes I had been holding sailed into the air, their contents spilling everywhere. I flew backward, my back hitting the cold, hard wall with a thud. I slumped to the floor, gasping for air that wouldn't come. Everything hurt. My chest felt like it was on fire, and my vision was blurring at the edges. A small trickle of blood ran down my cheek from where I had scraped it during the fall. Menecios stood over me, his gold dragons shimmering in the low light. He raised his foot again, preparing for a final blow that would make sure I never spoke again. I closed my eyes, praying for it to be quick. I had tried so hard to be invisible, to be a nobody, but my luck had finally run out. I was just a delivery girl, and in a second, I would be nothing at all. I squeezed my eyes shut, waiting for the heavy black boot to come down. My heart was thumping so hard against my bruised ribs that it felt like it might burst. I could hear the rain splashing against the window and the frantic beeping of the hospital monitor, but mostly, I just felt the cold presence of Choi Menecios standing over me. I was certain this was the end of my life. But the blow never came. "I wouldn't do that if I were you, Menecios." The voice didn't come from inside the room. It came from the doorway. It was a low, smooth sound, like velvet and ice mixed together. It wasn't a shout, but it held so much power that the air in the room seemed to freeze. Menecios' foot stopped just inches from my face. He froze as if someone had turned him into a statue. Slowly, he pulled his leg back and turned his head toward the door. I blinked my eyes open, my vision still a bit shaky and blurred from the pain. In the doorway stood a man in a dark suit, his face half hidden by the shadows of the hallway. He was tall, taller than anyone I had ever seen, and he stood perfectly still. Behind him, the older man who had been peeking into the room earlier was trembling so much he had to lean against the wall. The old man looked like he had just seen a ghost, his face a ghostly white. But it was Menecios' reaction that shocked me the most. The powerful Mafia boss, the man with the gold dragons on his shoulders who had just kicked me like I was a piece of trash, began to lose his color. The anger in his face vanished, replaced by a look of pure, raw terror. His eyes went wide, and his jaw actually dropped open. "You," Menecios whispered. His voice was no longer a jagged blade. It was weak and shaky. "Why are you here? You disappeared years ago. Everyone said you were dead." The tall man stepped out of the shadows and into the dim light of the hospital room. He didn't look like a ghost. He looked like an angel of death. His eyes were dark and steady, showing no emotion at all. He didn't look at the traitor on the floor, and he didn't look at Menecios. Instead, his gaze fell directly on me. "The true king never stays gone forever," the mysterious man said. "And he certainly doesn't forget his own blood." Menecios' hands began to shake. He looked from the man to me, then back to the man. "You don't mean this girl? She's just a delivery girl. She was in the wrong place at the wrong time." "She is in the exact place she belongs," the bodyguard replied. He walked toward me with slow, measured steps. The sound of his boots on the floor was like the ticking of a clock counting down to 0. "And you just made the biggest mistake of your life, Choi Menecios. You laid a hand on the only person in this world you should have feared." Menecios stumbled back, hitting the edge of a hospital bed. The man who had been so terrifying just a minute ago now looked small and helpless. He looked like he wanted to run, but he knew there was nowhere to hide. The tall man reached me and knelt down. He didn't touch me roughly. Instead, he reached out a gloved hand and gently moved a stray hair away from my bloody cheek. For the first time, I felt a tiny spark of safety, even though I had no idea who this man was or why the most dangerous boss in the city was so afraid of him. "Don't move, princess," the bodyguard murmured. "The nightmare is over for you. But for him, it is only beginning." I looked up at the man kneeling beside me. His eyes weren't cold like Minecio's. They were deep and serious. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a clean white handkerchief. Gently, he dabbed the blood from my cheek. I was still gasping for air, my chest throbbing where the heavy boot had struck me, but the presence of this stranger was like a shield between me and the rest of the world. Minecio was still backed against the hospital bed, his face pale and sweating. He looked like he wanted to vanish into the wall. The older man in the gray suit, the witness who had been hiding in the doorway, finally stepped fully into the room. His hands were shaking so hard he had to tuck them into his pockets. He looked at me, then at the tall bodyguard, and a look of pure horror washed over his face. "You said she was just a witness, Miss O," the older man squeaked, his voice cracking. "You said she was a nobody. If I had known, if I had even guessed who she was." The bodyguard stood up slowly, turning his back to me to face the two men. He looked like a mountain that was about to fall on them. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small, old photograph. He didn't show it to them right away. Instead, he looked at me one more time. "Sophia," he said, and hearing my name in his voice made my heart skip a beat. "Do you know why you've always felt like you had to hide? Do you know why you felt like you didn't fit into the world of delivery bikes and small apartments?" I couldn't speak. I just shook my head slowly. The bodyguard turned the photograph around so Minecio and the witness could see it. It was a picture of a man who looked exactly like the person people used to call the true king, the legendary leader who had ruled the city with honor before he was betrayed and disappeared. In the man's arms was a tiny baby girl with the same eyes I saw in the mirror every morning. Around the baby's neck was a thin gold chain with a very specific signet ring, the same ring I had tucked under my shirt right now. "She isn't a witness," the bodyguard said, his voice echoing in the sterile room. "She is the daughter of the king. She is the last of the royal bloodline that you thought you had wiped out 20 years ago." The man in the gray suit let out a choked sob and sank to his knees. He realized that by standing there and watching Minecio attack me, he had almost assisted in a royal execution. In their world, there was no greater crime. To touch the king's daughter was to sign your own death warrant. Minecio's knees buckled. The dragon of the Mafia was gone. He was just a man who had made a fatal mistake. He looked at his own foot, the one he had used to kick me, as if he wanted to cut it off. "I didn't know," Minecio rasped, his voice barely a whisper. "The records said the child died in the fire. I thought she was just a girl in a gray uniform. Please, ghost, tell the king I didn't know." "The king is gone," the bodyguard replied, his shadow stretching across the floor until it touched Minecio's shoes. "But I am still here. And I have been waiting 20 years to find her. You didn't just kick a delivery girl, Choi Minecio. You declared war on a ghost. And ghosts don't forgive." I touched the ring beneath my shirt, the cold metal feeling heavy against my skin. My whole life, I had tried to be invisible because I was afraid of the dark. Now, I realized the dark was actually my home, and the man standing over me was the only person who truly knew who I was. The rain outside turned into a roar, and for the first time, the beeping of the hospital monitors didn't sound like a warning. It sounded like a heartbeat. My heartbeat. The heartbeat of a girl who was no longer just a delivery girl. The air in the room became so still that I could hear the individual drops of rain hitting the glass. Minecio, the man who had looked like a giant only moments ago, slowly lowered himself until his knees hit the hard hospital floor. He didn't look like a boss anymore. He looked like a man who was watching his own world crumble into dust. His slicked back hair was messy now, and his hands, which had been so steady when he struck me, were shaking uncontrollably against his thighs. I will do anything, Minacio whispered, his forehead almost touching the ground.
Please.
I have served the families for 30 years. I made a mistake, but my loyalty is real. Do not let my life end because of a delivery cap and a gray jacket. The bodyguard, the man Minacio called Ghost, didn't move. He stood over the Mafia boss like an ancient judge. He didn't seem to care about Minacio's 30 years of service. He only seemed to care about the girl sitting on the floor with blood on her face. Your life is already over, Choi Minacio, Ghost said, his voice flat and calm. The moment your boot touched her ribs, the man you were ceased to exist. You are no longer a boss. You are no longer a dragon. You are a debt that needs to be paid. The witness in the gray suit let out a small, terrified sob from the corner, but a single look from Ghost silenced him instantly. Ghost turned his attention back to the man on his knees. However, Ghost continued, the princess is now in the light. Your attack was loud. The monitors recorded the struggle. The traitor on the floor saw her face. Word will travel through the streets of Seoul before the sun rises. Every rival family, every greedy snake who wants to steal the true king's legacy will be coming for her. Minacio looked up, his eyes wide and bloodshot. I can stop them. My men are the best in the city. I can build a wall around her. You will do more than that, Ghost said. He stepped forward, forcing Minacio to look him in the eye. You will be her shield. From this second until your last breath, her safety is your only purpose. If a single hair on her head is harmed, I will not just kill you. I will erase everything you have ever loved. Your name, your wealth, and your men will vanish from the earth as if they never existed. Minacio nodded frantically, his face pale with a mix of fear and a strange kind of relief. He had been given a second chance, even if it was a dangerous one. He turned toward me, but he didn't dare get too close. He bowed his head low, his voice cracking with emotion. Princess Sophia, he said, the words sounding heavy in his mouth. I am your blade and your shield. My life is yours to throw away. Please, forgive this fool for his blindness. I looked at him, then at Ghost. My chest still hurt, and my brain was spinning with all this talk of kings and princesses. I was just Sophia. I was the girl who lived on ramen and rode a beat-up scooter through the rain. But as I looked at the powerful man begging for my forgiveness, I realized that my old life was gone. I wasn't the prey anymore. I was the prize that everyone was going to fight for. Ghost reached down and offered me his hand. His glove was soft, but his grip was like iron. He pulled me to my feet, steadying me when my legs felt weak. The hospital is no longer safe, Ghost said, looking at the door. The wolves are already waking up. Minacio, get your best men to the south exit. If we see a single person who doesn't belong, eliminate them. We are taking the princess home. Minacio scrambled to his feet, his face set in a look of grim determination. He didn't look at the traitor he had been punishing earlier. He only looked at me, waiting for a command I didn't know how to give. For the first time in my life, I wasn't the one being kicked. I was the one people were willing to die for, and that thought was scarier than any mafia boss. The lights in the hallway flickered once, twice, and then died completely. For a heartbeat, the only light came from the blue and green glow of the medical monitors. Then, the backup generators kicked in with a low, vibrating hum, bathing the room in a dim, eerie red light. The silence of the hospital was gone. From somewhere down the hall, the heavy sound of a door being kicked open echoed through the air, followed by a noise that made my stomach drop, the sharp, metallic click of many guns being readied at once. They are here, Ghost whispered. He didn't sound surprised. He sounded like a man who had been expecting a fight his entire life. Minacio didn't hesitate. He pulled a heavy handgun from the folds of his traditional robes. He moved to the doorway, his eyes darting back and forth. The terrified witness in the suit tried to crawl under a hospital bed, but Minacio ignored him. All his focus was on the hallway. The Shadow Syndicate, Minacio hissed. They must have had someone watching the wing. They know the princess has been found. Suddenly, the red-lit hallway erupted in noise. A burst of gunfire shattered the glass of the nurse's station, just outside our door. The sound was deafening, like 100 firecrackers going off in a tiny box. I jumped, pressing my back against the cold wall. I could hear the rain roaring against the windows, mixing with the shouting of men and the breaking of glass. It felt like the world was falling apart. "Stay down," Ghost commanded. He pushed me toward a thick marble pillar in the corner of the room. I huddled behind the cold stone, my hands covering my ears. I saw Mafia lean out into the hallway and fire 3 times. The muzzle flashes from his gun lit up the room like lightning. Someone screamed outside, and the sound of heavy boots running on the tile grew louder. These weren't just common criminals. They were trained assassins, and they were moving through the hospital wing like a wave of shadows. Ghost moved with a speed that didn't seem human. He didn't use a gun. Instead, he pulled 2 long, thin blades from his sleeves. A man in a dark tactical vest burst through our door, his weapon raised. Before the assassin could even pull the trigger, Ghost was on him. There was a blur of movement, a soft sound, and the assassin fell to the floor without a word. "Mafia, hold the door," Ghost shouted over the roar of the rain and the gunfire. Mafia stood his ground, firing steadily into the darkness of the hallway. "I am the shield," he roared, his voice full of a desperate kind of pride. He was fighting like a man who knew he had everything to lose. Bullets tore through the thin walls of the hospital room, sending bits of white plaster and dust flying into the air like snow. A stray shot hit a water pipe in the ceiling, and suddenly, a cold spray began to leak down, mixing with the dust and the red light. Everything felt messy and blurred. I looked at the delivery boxes I had dropped earlier. They were shredded by bullets now, the items I was supposed to deliver scattered and ruined. I realized then that there was no going back. These people weren't going to stop until they had me, or until they were dead. The sterile, quiet hospital had turned into a war zone, and I was at the very center of it. "The south exit is blocked," Mafia called out, his breath coming in ragged gasps. "There are too many of them." Ghost grabbed my arm, his grip firm and steady. He looked at the window where the rain was still pouring down. "Then we make our own exit," he said. He looked at Mafia and gave a short, sharp nod. "Cover the princess. We are leaving now." Mafia stepped in front of me, his body acting as a human wall, as Ghost prepared to lead us out into the chaos of the rain and the gunfire. I clutched the signet ring through my shirt, feeling its cold edge against my skin. I was terrified, but for the first time, I wasn't just running. I was moving with the men who were willing to burn the city down, just to keep me breathing. The red emergency lights flickered as Ghost led us toward the end of the hallway. The smell of gunpowder was so strong it made my eyes water. Every time a gun went off, the sound bounced off the narrow walls, making it impossible to tell where the shooters were hiding. Mafia stayed right beside me, his eyes moving like a hawk watching for movement in the tall grass. He didn't look like the man who had kicked me anymore. He looked like a soldier who had found a reason to fight. "Move. Now," Ghost barked, his voice cutting through the noise of the storm outside. We reached a heavy set of double doors that led to the service stairs. Just as Ghost reached for the handle, the shadows at the other end of the hall moved. 3 men in black, tactical gear stepped out from a side room. They didn't say a word. They just raised their weapons and began to fire. I felt a strong hand grab my shoulder and shove me down behind a heavy metal laundry cart. Mafia didn't hide. He stepped into the line of fire, his traditional black robes fluttering as he raised his own gun to return fire. The hallway turned into a blur of light and noise. I saw sparks fly as bullets hit the metal cart right next to my head. Suddenly, Mafia let out a sharp, ragged grunt. I watched in horror as his body jerked backward. A dark red stain began to spread across the gold dragon on his shoulder, and another appeared on his side. He didn't fall, but his face twisted in pain. Even as the bullets hit him, he didn't move away. He stayed standing right in front of me, using his own body to block the shots meant for me. "Mafia!" I screamed, but the sound was swallowed by a massive crash of thunder from outside. Ghost didn't hesitate. He leapt from behind the doors like a shadow. In a flash of silver, he reached the gunman. It was over in seconds. The attackers dropped to the floor, and Ghost was back at our side before the empty shell casings had even stopped bouncing on the tile. Minnesota slumped against the laundry cart, his breathing heavy and wet. His face was gray, and sweat was dripping down his forehead, mixing with the spray from the broken pipes. He looked down at me, and for the first time, I saw something other than fear or anger in his eyes. I saw a deep, painful loyalty. He had paid his debt in blood. "The princess is safe," Minnesota gasped. He clutched his side, red leaking through his fingers. "I told you, I would be the shield." "Don't talk," Ghost said, his voice unusually soft. He grabbed Minnesio's arm and threw it over his shoulder, lifting the heavy man with incredible strength. "We have to go. The window is our only way out." Ghost led us to a large window at the end of the hall. With one powerful kick, he shattered the glass. The sound of the storm rushed in, filling the hallway with the cold, wet smell of the night. Rain lashed against my face, instantly soaking my gray delivery uniform. It was a long drop to the alleyway below, but there was a metal fire escape clinging to the side of the building. I climbed out first, my hands shaking as I gripped the cold, slippery metal railings. The wind tried to pull me away, but I held on with everything I had. Ghost followed, carefully helping the wounded Minnesio through the broken frame. We scrambled down the metal stairs, our footsteps clanging in the dark. By the time we hit the pavement of the alley, my lungs were burning and my heart was racing. A sleek black car was waiting at the end of the dark path, its engine humming like a sleeping beast. Ghost shoved us into the back seat just as more black vans pulled into the hospital parking lot. As the car sped away into the rainy night, I looked back at the hospital. The lights were still flickering, and I could see the silhouettes of men in the windows. I looked at Minnesio, who was leaning his head back against the seat, his eyes closed in pain. He had nearly died to protect me, the same girl he had tried to kill an hour ago. I clutched the signet ring under my shirt and watched the city lights blur through the rain-streaked glass. I didn't know where we were going, but I knew the delivery girl I used to be was gone forever. The black car moved like a ghost through the flooded streets of Seoul. Inside, the only sounds were the soft hum of the engine and Minnesio's heavy, uneven breathing. Ghost sat in the front seat, his eyes fixed on the rearview mirror, watching for any headlights that might be following us. I sat in the back, huddled in the corner, feeling the damp fabric of my delivery uniform stick to my skin. I looked at the KR Delivery logo on my sleeve. It felt like a costume from a play that had finally ended. We eventually pulled into a hidden garage beneath a tall, stone building that looked more like a fortress than a house. The air here was dry and quiet, a sharp contrast to the chaos of the hospital. Ghost helped Minnesio out of the car. A team of silent men in black suits appeared from the shadows, whisking the wounded boss away to a private medical room. Minnesio gave me one last, weak nod before he disappeared behind a set of heavy doors. He was pale, but he was alive. Ghost turned to me. He looked tired, but his eyes were still as sharp as his blades. "This is the Vance estate," he said, gesturing to the wide marble hallway. "It has been empty for 20 years, waiting for the rightful heir to return. You're safe here, Sophia. But first, you must leave the delivery girl behind." He led me up a grand staircase to a room that took my breath away. It was huge, with high ceilings and walls lined with ancient paintings. In the center of the room, laid out on a bed of dark silk, was a set of clothes that looked like they belonged in a museum. They were traditional robes, deep red and gold, made of a fabric so fine it looked like woven light. "These belong to your mother," Ghost said softly. "The Queen. She wanted you to wear them when you came of age. I think today is that day." He left the room, closing the heavy wooden door with a soft click. I stood alone in the silence. I walked over to a full-length mirror and looked at myself. I saw a girl in a stained gray jacket and a crooked baseball cap. I saw the dirt from the hospital floor on my knees and the streak of dried blood on my cheek. I looked like a stray cat that had been caught in a storm. Slowly, I reached up and took off my delivery cap. I dropped it on the floor. Then, I unzipped the gray jacket and let it fall. One by one, I removed the pieces of my old life. The heavy work boots, the worn-out trousers, the cheap cotton shirt. I left them in a messy pile in the corner of the room. Without the uniform, I felt small and cold, but I also felt lighter. I picked up the red robes. The silk felt cool and smooth against my fingers, much softer than anything I had ever touched. As I put them on, I felt a strange sense of strength flowing through me. The gold embroidery on the sleeves matched the signet ring I wore around my neck. I tied the silk sash around my waist and stood tall. I walked back to the mirror. The girl from the delivery bike was gone. In her place was someone I didn't recognize, but someone I felt I was meant to be. The red color made my skin look bright, and the gold shimmered in the warm light of the room. I reached under the collar of the robe and pulled out the signet ring, letting it hang openly over the silk. I wasn't Sophia, the delivery girl, anymore. I was Sophia, the daughter of the king. I realized then that the uniform hadn't been my protection, it had been my cage. By trying to be invisible, I had been hiding the truth of who I was. There was a soft knock on the door. I took a deep breath, squared my shoulders, and called out, "Come in." Ghost entered. He stopped in his tracks, his dark eyes widening as he looked at me. For the first time, a small, genuine smile touched his lips. He bowed deeply, his forehead nearly touching the floor. "Welcome home, princess," he whispered. I looked out the window at the city lights. The rain had stopped, and the clouds were parting to show a single, bright star. The war wasn't over. I knew the syndicate was still out there, searching for me, but for the first time in my life, I wasn't afraid of the dark. I was the one who was going to light it up. The safety of the Vance estate felt like a dream, but in the shadows of the city, the dream was already turning into a nightmare. While I stood in my mother's red robes, feeling the weight of the gold silk against my skin, a very different meeting was happening in a cold, damp parking garage across town. The witness from the hospital, the man in the dark gray suit, was no longer shaking with fear. Instead, his eyes were bright with greed. He had spent his whole life being a nobody, a small man who followed orders from people like Mafia. But today, he held a secret that was worth more than all the gold in the city. He knew exactly where the ghost had taken the princess. He stood by a concrete pillar, clutching his phone with sweaty hands. A black car with tinted windows pulled up silently, its headlights cutting through the darkness of the garage. The back door opened just a crack, and a voice like dry leaves blowing on a grave spoke from the darkness. "Do you have it?" the voice asked. The man in the gray suit stepped forward, his heart racing. "I have the address. It's the old Vance estate. They think they are safe behind the stone walls, but I saw the route. I saw the gate codes Mafia used." A pale hand reached out from the car, holding a thick envelope. The witness grabbed it, his fingers fumbling with the seal. Inside was more money than he had ever seen in his life. He didn't care about the true king. He didn't care about the girl he had watched get kicked across a hospital room. He only cared about the life this money would buy him. "You have done well," the voice from the car said. "The Shadow Syndicate does not forget its friends. But remember, if you have lied to us, there is no corner of this earth where you can hide." "I'm not lying," the man squeaked, his voice echoing in the empty garage. "They are there. The ghost, the wounded dragon, and the girl. They are all together." The car door shut with a heavy thud, and the vehicle sped away, leaving the witness alone in the dark. He didn't know that the syndicate didn't actually keep friends. He didn't realize that as soon as the car reached the end of the block, a message was sent to a team of hunters. The man in the gray suit had outlived his usefulness. Back at the estate, the air felt strangely heavy. I stood by the large window, looking out at the gardens. The silence was too perfect, like the quiet right before a trap snapped shut. Ghost appeared in the doorway, his face as still as a mask, but I saw the way his hand rested on the hilt of the blade hidden in his sleeve. "Something is wrong," Ghost whispered. He didn't need to see the black vans racing toward our gates to know that the peace was over. He could feel the shift in the wind. Down the hall, Mafia groaned in his sleep, his body still fighting the fever from his wounds. He had nearly died to keep the secret of my location, never imagining that the small, terrified man in the suit, the man he had trusted to stay quiet, had already sold us out for a bag of cash. I looked down at the signet ring. It felt cold against my chest. We had traded the hospital for a fortress, but a fortress is only a prison if the enemy knows where the keys are kept. The betrayal was moving toward us through the night, fast and silent, and the red robes I wore suddenly felt like a target instead of a crown. The Shadow Syndicate was coming, and this time, there would be no back exit to save us. The front gates of the estate didn't just open. They were blown apart. The sound was like a giant hammer hitting a drum, shaking the very floor beneath my feet. I stood at the top of the grand staircase, the red and gold silk of my robes fluttering in the cold breeze that rushed through the broken entrance. Below me, Ghost stood like a wall of shadow, his twin blades already drawn and gleaming under the dim chandeliers. Minacio leaned against the banister halfway down the stairs. He was pale, and a fresh bandage was visible beneath his torn shirt, but his hand was steady as he held his heavy handgun. He looked up at me and gave a small, grim nod. He was ready to die to keep the stairs clear. A dozen men in black tactical gear poured into the hall. They didn't move like regular people. They moved like machines, their weapons aimed and ready. This was the Shadow Syndicate's final hit squad. They had come to finish what started at the hospital. "Kill the guards. Bring the girl," the leader of the squad shouted. The hallway erupted into a storm of noise and fire. Ghost was a blur of movement, spinning through the attackers like a whirlwind. Every time his blades flashed, an enemy fell. Minaso fired from the stairs, his bullets hitting with perfect accuracy, forcing the hit squad to dive for cover behind the marble pillars. I watched, my heart hammering against my ribs, realizing that these two men were the only thing standing between me and a shallow grave. But the hit squad was relentless. They used small smoke grenades that filled the hall with thick, gray clouds. I couldn't see Ghost anymore, only the sparks of his blades hitting metal. Minacio groaned as a stray bullet grazed his arm, but he didn't stop firing. "Sophia, stay back." Ghost's voice echoed through the smoke, but I didn't move. I couldn't. Suddenly, the leader of the hit squad burst through the smoke, his eyes locked on mine. He raised his weapon, a cruel smile on his face. But before he could pull the trigger, Ghost appeared from the darkness behind him. With a powerful kick, Ghost sent the man flying into the center of the hall, disarming him in one smooth motion. The rest of the hit squad was gone, either fallen or fled into the night. Only the leader remained, pinned to the floor by Ghost's heavy boot. Minacio limped down the stairs, his gun pointed at the man's head, his breath coming in ragged gasps. "It is over," Ghost said, his voice cold and flat. He looked up at me, standing at the top of the stairs. "Princess, the choice is yours. This man led the attack on your life. He represents the people who murdered your father and chased you into the shadows." Minacio looked at me, his face covered in sweat and dust. "Give the word, princess. One pull of the trigger, and the syndicate loses its best hunter. We can end this right now." The hall went silent. Even the wind outside seemed to stop. The leader of the hit squad looked up at me, his face full of hatred, but also a tiny bit of fear. I looked down at the signet ring in my hand. For years, I had been the girl who ran. I had been the girl who was kicked and pushed aside. But as I looked at the man on the floor, I realized I held his life in my hands. "No," I said, my voice sounding much stronger than I felt. Minacio frowned, his finger tightening on the trigger. "Princess? He will just come back with more men. Let him go," I commanded, stepping down the first few stairs. "Let him go back to the Shadow Syndicate. Tell them that Sophia, the daughter of the true king, is no longer hiding. Tell them that if they want my crown, they will have to face me in the light. But if they touch one more innocent person in this city, I will not be so merciful next time." Ghost looked at me for a long moment. A look of deep respect crossed his face, and he slowly lifted his foot from the man's chest. Minaso lowered his gun, though he didn't look happy about it. The hit squad leader scrambled to his feet, looking confused and humiliated. He stared at me for a second, then turned and ran out into the night, disappearing into the mist. I reached the bottom of the stairs and stood between Ghost and Minacio. My robes were dusty, and my heart was still racing, but I didn't feel like a delivery girl anymore. I looked at the broken gates and the wide, open world beyond them. What now? Minacio asked, wiping blood from his forehead. Now, I said, looking at Ghost. We stop running. We rebuild the Empire. And we make sure no one ever has to be afraid of the shadows again. Ghost bowed his head, his blades sliding back into his sleeves. As you wish, Princess. The sun began to rise over the city, its light spilling through the broken doors and turning the dust in the air into gold. The war wasn't over, but as we stood together in the light of the new day, I knew we were ready for whatever came next. Sophia Vance had finally come home. If this story resonated with you, if you've ever felt small or worthless or forgotten, I want you to know something. You're not alone and you're stronger than you think. If you enjoyed this journey with me, please hit that like button. It helps more people find these stories. People who need to hear them. Drop a comment below and tell me, have you ever had a moment where you'd stood up for yourself? Where you finally said enough? I read every single comment, and I love hearing your stories. And if you want more stories about survival, strength, and second chances, subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications. I share new stories every week.